Hi, this is Kit, and this is a walkthrough of a dress build that I made for Easter for my youngest daughter. Now, this build is something I recorded for two reasons. So this is the base pattern, and I made the long dress for my oldest daughter, and I had a ton of fabric left over, so I decided to make the small dress for my younger daughter. And the problem being that this pattern is for sizes 8 through 16, but my younger daughter is a size 6. She's actually kind of more of a 5.5, so 6 will be a little bit big for her. So I needed to size the pattern down first. So I used a visible crayon in like this magenta color, and I used the other sizes as a gauge for sizing down to a size 6 on the different pieces that I would need. So the bodice pieces and the skirt pieces, you can see in the sped up footage how I went about sizing those down. Apologies for my head being in the way a substantial amount of the time. So I did go through and show all of this part on video because I thought it would be helpful for anyone who is trying to size a pattern either up or down from something that they already own. You can kind of use proportions and math and follow the pattern, I guess established by the pattern pieces to size things appropriately. So at this point, I'm doing the pleated front of the skirt, which I followed again down, sizing appropriately to make sure it was about size 6. And then as soon as I was done sizing down the pattern, I went about tracing it onto my fabric. So I use tracing paper to go underneath the pieces because I like to preserve the pattern so I can reuse it if I'd like to, like I'm doing now. So I'm just using this blue shade of tracing paper to go in and very carefully trace out the pattern. I also showed the entire video of this because I want people to see how I'm working to make sure that I'm using every inch of fabric that I possibly can. So I have these little cutout pieces from my older daughter's pattern, so I'm finding pieces that are going to go along the grain line the correct way and getting those little tiny pieces used for this pattern. So you can kind of see the work that goes into that, some of the adjustments and some of the things I just had to concede were going to be wasted fabric that I couldn't do anything with. But I was able to make the whole pattern and then some with my leftovers from my older daughters based on what the pattern told me to buy, which they always seem to tell you to buy too much. So I highly encourage people to be prudent with your pattern cutting and go through the extra work because sometimes you can basically get 2 dresses for the price of 1 in this case. So just tracing out some final bodice pieces at this point. Now the other reason that I decided to do a video of this project, it isn't just sizing down a pattern, but I also did some work with lace. So I liked the look of having lace over a solid piece of fabric that you get in the special fabrics in Joanna's store. So that's what I'm moving on to now. So to do the lace, you just need to make sure that you're in the grain correctly, and then I used the cut pieces that I cut out of the pattern in the last go. I used those as my pattern for the lace. So I just bound the pieces to the lace and then used my radial cutter to slice them out carefully. Now you don't have to be as precise with the lace because it can go over. You're using the very carefully cut out solid pieces as your pattern gauge. So if the lace itself goes a little bit out of bounds, it's not a big deal. As you can see, some of that is happening here in the sped up footage, if you can see. So just doing the bodice now. You can see all the pieces are done. I have lace for all of them. I'm retracing some of the markers like for a dart that I'm going to need to put into the back. Now the next step, you can see I've already completed. You need to stitch the lace onto the pieces in a baste stitch. So I'm showing you the skirt here, and then leave open on the skirt the last 4 inches or so, because if you bind it, the skirt just lays in a really weird way. So you need to have the lace loose and have it hemmed on its own in those last 4 inches. So at this point I have the lace basted to the bottom or the base pieces, so I'm following the pattern at this point. So you aren't going to see anything but my indicating what step I'm about to take and then the product of that step. So here I'm getting the bodice done. And the next step is going to be doing those dart in the back pieces as I was talking about a moment ago. So it's getting that dart indicated. And it's sewn. So I got it cut down so it's nice for both of those pieces. And then this next step is going to be stitching the front to the back at the top of the shoulder. So that's what I'm indicating here. The rest really comes, it goes according to pattern. So if you happen to have this pattern at home, it's pretty basic at this point. You can just follow along with the product of each step that I'll be recording. Now, for the next step, you repeat everything with the lining. So I won't show you through all of that process. I'm just going to show you the lining is done, just like I had done to the base. So I stitched the lining to the main front of the bodice, and I'm turning it inside out through the shoulders, which were a little bit tough there. So I sped up the footage because it was a bit of a struggle to get all the fabric through the narrow part of the shoulders, but I did eventually win out, and you'll see the entire thing flipped. And with all the fabric at the seams, it's pretty resistant to laying flat at this point. So I did go in and I ironed it in order to try and get it to lay flat, which you can see there. It was hard because we're working with a lot of curves at this point. So the next step was it did not make sense on paper, but it made sense when I had the piece in my hand. It was stitching the sides together. So you have to open it up so you have to open the lining and the front of the bodice and then stitch it up together in order to complete the side of the bodice in a way that hides the seams. So you can see I'm getting it laid out right there. And with all the fabric, with that lace layer, it does add a little bit of slickness, and so I used a lot of pinning in this pattern. You can see that work is done. So when I flip it all, the right way, you can see the sides are complete and the seam is hidden on those sides. So we have a nearly complete bodice at this point. So now we're moving on to the skirt, and this is the pleating. So the pleating is really important it's an important detail in this pattern. So I'm taking a lot of care to make sure that my pleats are going to stay straight, because the first thing that you'll need to do is baste in those pleats to make sure that they stay before you wind up stitching them into the bodice. So I'm doing the same thing with the back pleats here, being really careful to make sure that I keep my lines on the fold of the pleat, make sure I don't have any puckering that's going to happen, and I'm even double pinning. As you can see, I did that on the front skirt, and I'm doing it on the back skirt, like so. And I am leaving some of those pins in to maintain the integrity of that pleat at this point, because there's just so much being sewn together at this point. I didn't want to lose those pleats, so I left those pins in. So this, before you are going to attach it to the bodice, you need to stitch up the sides, and again, leave that last 4 inches or so of the skirts open. So I have the sides stitched up, and now I am connecting the bodice to the skirt. So again, those pins are still in. You want to make sure it's the bodice without the lining that you're attaching and sewing in. You need the lining to be loose for the final step of the skirt. So you can see it all pinned together and ready to go. And here it is stitched together. So all of the pleats, they're a little bit poofy right now because the skirt and the bodice are still not completely structured, but everything is sewn together. All the pleats are as they should be and look quite nice. So the other tricky part of this is the invisible zipper. So I'm going to actually show some footage of my machine sewing this. So you attach the invisible zipper upside down against the right side of your fabric, making sure that the top of the zipper is aligned with the top of your garment. So I carefully got the zipper lined up and am pinning it into place very carefully. You're supposed to pin it so that the zipper itself is at the seam allowance. So for this garment, it was 5/8 inch of a seam allowance. So again, carefully pinning in that zipper. Only poking myself a couple times. There we go. And now we're moving over to my machine. So I have on a zipper foot, so it looks different than a normal foot, and I honestly didn't know what this was until very recently, unfortunately. So I'm pressing that zipper foot as closely to the zipper as I can get, but you'll see in the next couple steps that there's still even a gap, even so, but this is at least securing my zipper so that I don't have to deal with pins after this step. So I'm still taking a lot of care trying to keep that seam as close to the zipper edge as possible without actually sewing in the zipper. Don't do that because then the zipper won't zip. And I did end up trimming down my seam so it wasn't as bulky. You can see how much, how bulky it is and how much fraying I'm dealing with at this point. I don't have a serger style machine, so I don't have a way of like doing a really neat hem on the inside, or seam on the inside, but I at least try to trim it up to keep it from getting too crazy. So at this point I wanted to test the zipper to make sure I didn't get any of the teeth in the machine. So it zips up. It has a little trouble getting over the bulk in the connection between the bodice and the skirt, and you'll see that winds up being an unavoidable show through on the final invisible zipper. So I have the second part pinned. I zip it up to make sure that it's falling in the right place for the garment, and then here we are. I have the zipper bound to the garment, so I'm zipping it up. And now you can see if I stretch out the fabric, there's a lot of zipper showing through, and this is supposed to be an invisible zipper. So that's a problem. So I'm going to go back to my machine and I'm going to get it closer to the teeth. So you can see I'm rolling back the teeth next to where the zipper is secured to, whatever that thing is called. And there's a substantial gap still. So I go back to my machine and I actually pull the teeth back. You can see I'm pulling with my index finger the teeth of the zipper away from its base. And as you look, you can see I'm getting 1/8 of an inch or so of extra closeness to the invisible zipper. So I'll show you a little bit of zipping there. And I did this for both sides of the zipper, but I had to go back and open up the how close it was to the zipper at the place where the bodice meets the skirt, because there was just so much fabric right there that it was impossible to zip at an invisible zipper spacing. So you'll see that when I have the final piece and I show you like pulling at the zipper, all of the zipper is hidden except at that point where the bodice and the skirt meet. So you can see how much of that, how much closer we're able to get to the zipper going through the second time. And then you see, almost impossible to see the zipper, except right there. Oop, unavoidable. I couldn't do it without basically disabling my zipper. So there we go. The zipper is done. Oop, if I don't jam it in my garment. Lots of things to catch at this point too, so you have to be careful with a zipper when you're dealing with lace. So there we go, it zips. Hooray! Oop, I'm going to show you again. I probably should have cut this part out. All right, now we still have a little bit of work to do at this point. With everything that is below the zipper connecting the rest of the dress at that point. So that's what I'm showing off here. So I have to attach all of that down to, again, that last 4 inches that are loose intentionally. So it's about 8 inches of sewing, and now that is done. So you can see the zipper ends, and then the garment is joined right there at the skirt. Got to show off that zipper one more time. Very nice. All right, so at this point, we're going to start seaming in the lace pieces together, and then the underlaying piece as well, so that they are seamed in but are separate. As you can see, I've completed that. The lace is sewn together and it lies like a little more loosely against the skirt. It just looks a lot nicer in the end. I discovered that with my older daughter's dress, so I had to redo that part for my older daughter. And then I also did the bottom hem. So this shows you the last 2 things that you need to do for this dress, and that is hand stitching. You take, return to that inner lining of the bodice, and you're attaching it after ironing it into a pressed fold on the edge. You are going to hand sew it into the seam allowance of the skirt. And so this is important because it keeps, it gives the bodice more structure, and it keeps the seam really nice at the top of the bodice, so you're not showing a bunch of liner, and it lays tightly. So the other thing I need to do is hand stitch in the ends of that zipper. So this shows you the end product of my hand stitching. I did just like a whip stitch to give it a little bit of extra tension, pulling that liner down. You can see that lining, because it's secured downward, is lying really nicely. And then the last piece is securing those zipper tops. So I tucked those down and then hand stitched everything really carefully into place. So I have a final dress at this point. And I'll be able to show you my try on with my daughter. And we're just kind of holding our breath at this point to hope that I got the sizing correctly for a size 6. So there she is doing her swirls. She is like a little bit below a size 6, so I think it's fitting her perfectly for a size 6. She's like a 5.5 size. So I think it looks quite nice, and was really pleased with how this all came together. So you can see some images of the back and the front of the bodice, and I'll show you what the inside of the bodice looks like with that lining one more time stitched in. So it's a lovely matched set with my older daughter's Easter dress. Of course, because of coronavirus this year, there will be no Easter celebration, but this will probably be our return to church dress in the end, our first time to go to public mass dress. So there they are side by side, and you can see that inside lining stitched in one more time on the inside and how it's secured. And I hope that this is helpful to someone. final look to the front of the dress. Have a great day.